The room still held its breath. Dust hovered in the beam of a single lamp as if the light itself hesitated to touch the floor. The walls remembered more than they showed. Time had folded inward here, leaving a thin residue of winter air and quiet regret. I stood where I had stood before, years ago, younger, certain, wrong. The scene had not changed. Only I had. The silence pressed close, patient, expectant, as though it knew I had come back not for answers but for accountability. In 1990, this house sat at the edge of a Kansas town that preferred straight roads and predictable lives. It had been empty then, too, empty of warmth, empty of direction. The woman connected to this place was named Eliza Rowan, 23. She grew up on the southern side of Wichita, the daughter of a night nurse and a father who repaired radios in his garage. Eliza learned early how to listen. She kept notebooks full of half-sentences and field sketches, little observations about people and places she thought might matter later. She planned to leave Kansas. She had already packed once. I ran my glove along the doorframe. The wood gave off a dry scent, old varnish, and something faintly sweet like paper stored too long in a drawer. Evidence never leaves, it waits. When we first processed this space, we were rushed. Too many assumptions, too much confidence. The town wanted closure, not understanding. Files were stamped, boxed, archived. The quiet returned. Now, decades later, the case had been reopened. Not because of noise, because of a detail that refused to rest. I moved slowly. Every step carried memory. The floor complained softly, a tired sound. In the living room, the furniture was gone, but shadows remained, rectangles of lighter wall where frames had once hung. I remembered a photograph found here, face down. We had catalogued it and moved on. I took it from the new evidence sleeve and held it under the lamp. Eliza stood near a riverbank, hair pinned back, eyes narrowed against the sun. Someone had written a date on the back. The ink had bled slightly, as if pressed too hard. I hadn't noticed the handwriting before, or maybe I had and dismissed it. My notebook rested heavy in my pocket. Guilt does that. It gains weight over time. The case file had grown thinner with each review, as if details evaporated under scrutiny, statements summarized, timelines simplified. But there was one document that hadn't aged well, a maintenance log from the local utilities office. It showed a service call to this address 3 days before Eliza disappeared from routine. At the time, it meant nothing. Now, it felt deliberate. I sat on the floor and spread the papers out. The sound of paper against wood echoed too loudly. The log listed a technician name. Initials only. We had accepted that. Now, with distance, it looked like a convenience, not a fact. I traced the letters with my finger, slow. Patterns emerge when you stop looking for conclusions. A voice broke the quiet, tentative. You find something. It was Tom, younger than the case, careful with his words. He stood in the doorway, respectful of the space. Maybe, I said. The word felt safer than certainty. He nodded, didn't press. Good investigators learn restraint early. We reviewed old interviews later that afternoon, fragmented recollections. A neighbor who remembered a car parked too long, a clerk who recalled Eliza asking for directions she didn't need. One statement stood out, buried in the middle of a transcript. A pause, a correction. The interviewee had mentioned seeing someone with Eliza, then amended it to say they weren't sure. We had accepted the amendment. We shouldn't have. Listening again, the hesitation sounded different, not confusion, caution. I closed my eyes and listened to the tape, the soft hiss between words. The room smelled faintly of ozone from the recorder. Eliza's name surfaced again and again, each time a little flatter, a little more distant. Names do that when they're repeated without care. We cross-checked the initials from the maintenance log against employee rosters from 1990. Most were gone, retired, moved. One remained local. The logic was simple. Not a leap. A line drawn straight instead of curved. He had lived within walking distance. He had requested a shift change the week after the incident. At the time, it was filed as routine. I drove past his house that evening. Lights on, curtains drawn. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that suggests cooperation rather than peace. I didn't stop. Not yet. Evidence needs patience. So do people. Back at the station, I reviewed Eliza's notebooks. They had been returned to her family, then retrieved with permission. The pages were careful, observant. On one page, a note stood alone. Trust feels different when it's asked for. No context. No date. It had been overlooked as poetry. Now it read like a warning. The next morning, we re-entered the house with fresh eyes. In the kitchen, behind a loose panel, we found something we had missed before. Not dramatic. Not hidden with intent. Just neglected. A small card creased with a phone number written twice. The ink matched the photograph. The handwriting matched the maintenance log. Logic does not shout, it whispers. When we finally spoke to the man, the conversation was brief, fragmented. "I was working," he said. "Here?" I asked. A pause, a breath. "Nearby." He avoided my eyes. That told me more than any word. The community reacted quickly once the arrest was made. Surprise, disbelief, then relief shaped like headlines. For me, it was quieter, mechanical, necessary. Justice moved forward because it had to, not because it wanted to. I returned to the house one last time before it was cleared for sale. The dust had settled differently. The air felt lighter, though nothing had changed. I stood where Eliza's photograph had been found and imagined her packing, planning, trusting. Cases close, files are stamped again, but something remains. A residue of human absence that no process removes. I turned off the lamp and let the room return to its waiting. The arrest did not change the light. Morning still arrived without ceremony, sliding across the station windows and settling on desks worn smooth by routine. Paperwork followed procedure. Evidence was logged again, now with renewed purpose. The past does not resist order. It simply waits to be sorted by someone patient enough to notice what was missed. I felt no triumph, only a narrowing of distance between then and now. Eliza Rowan's name appeared on every page, typed, stamped, repeated until it lost sound and became shape. That bothered me. Names should keep their weight. I slowed down, reading each reference as if it were the first. Her age remained 23 on every document preserved by ink. Time had moved everywhere else. We reconstructed her final days with care this time, no shortcuts. She had worked mornings at a small print shop, the kind that smelled of toner and warm metal. Coworkers described her as precise, quiet, attentive. She corrected margins others ignored. On her last recorded shift, she left early, citing a personal errand. That phrase had been accepted without question. Now it opened into something larger, undefined. A receipt surfaced from a local stationery store. The timestamp placed her there an hour later than expected. The purchase was modest. A folder, replacement pens, nothing urgent. The clerk's statement was brief, neutral. Still, it anchored her movements, gave shape to the afternoon. We placed the receipt on the table and let it speak. In her notebooks, I found a list that had not been catalogued before. It was folded into the back cover, creased from handling. Names without explanations. Initials beside addresses. A map of connections drawn lightly, erasable. The address of the house appeared once, circled. She had written it herself. That detail shifted the center of the case. She had chosen to go there. I returned to the town records office, a building that smelled of paper and slow afternoons. Property files revealed that the house had changed hands several times, often briefly. Temporary ownership leaves little trace. One transfer stood out, dated a year before 1990. The buyer's name matched the initials from the maintenance log. The connection was small, exact, difficult to ignore. Logic tightened, not coincidence, just alignment. When we reviewed his employment history, gaps appeared where explanations should have been. Leaves taken without clear reason, transfers requested suddenly. None of it was remarkable alone. Together, it formed a pattern of avoidance. I traced it with a pencil, resisting the urge to press hard. We requested a follow-up conversation. He agreed. People often do when they believe compliance will restore balance. The room was plain, the clock audible. I asked about the house. He answered carefully, words spaced, measured. "I helped maintain it," he said. "More than once?" I asked. A pause, a nod. He spoke of repairs that never appeared on invoices, of favors exchanged quietly. His voice remained even, but his hands told a different story, fingers touching, separating, returning. I did not interrupt. Silence encourages accuracy. Eliza's notebook lay open between us, the folded list visible. He glanced at it once quickly. Recognition does not announce itself loudly. It moves through the eyes. Afterward, I sat alone and listened to the recording. The sound of breathing filled the spaces between answers. In those spaces, the case resolved itself. Not dramatically, methodically. A series of small permissions granted over time, leading to a moment that could not be undone. The community gathered information the way communities always do, through repetition and reassurance. They wanted the story simplified, a clear line from question to answer. I could not give them that. Truth resists compression. Eliza's family was notified formally, then privately. I sat with them in a room that had learned how to hold grief without sound. Her mother asked few questions. Her father asked none. I gave them what I could: clarity, sequence, restraint. Justice, when delivered properly, should not overwhelm. As the legal process advanced, I stayed with the details. I reviewed the photograph again, noticing the riverbank behind Eliza, a location she had marked in her notes once. She had been attentive to places where water slowed, where sound softened. That felt consistent. It mattered. We found a second photograph months later, misplaced in a file sleeve. It showed the same riverbank from a different angle. The date matched the maintenance log. The handwriting matched the card. Small, devastating alignment. The twist was not revelation, but confirmation. I returned to the house after the final paperwork was signed. The air had changed again, less heavy, more indifferent. Spaces adapt. I stood in the kitchen and listened to nothing. The smell of dust had faded. In its place, a neutral emptiness. I thought of Eliza's note. Trust feels different when it's asked for. The case had taught me that logic does not absolve responsibility. It only clarifies it. When I left, I locked the door gently. The town resumed its rhythms. News cycles moved on. The file took its place among others marked resolved. But resolution is an administrative term. It satisfies systems, not memory. Driving away, I kept my hands steady on the wheel. Justice had operated as designed, precise, impersonal. Somewhere within that precision, something human remained, unresolved, quietly insisting on being remembered. The file closed with a soft sound, more felt than heard. Cardboard edges met, and the motion signaled an ending that was procedural, not emotional. I placed it on the shelf where completed cases live, aligned by year, then stepped back. The shelf looked unchanged. That was the point. Systems prefer continuity. They absorb outcomes and present stability in return. Weeks passed. The town adjusted. Conversations shortened. Familiar routes regained their comfort. I returned to routine work, newer cases, cleaner timelines. Still, certain details from 1990 surfaced uninvited, usually in quiet moments. Memory does not follow schedules. It selects its own entry points. I revisited Eliza Rowan's notebooks one final time before they were returned to her family permanently. The pages carried the faint smell of paper handled often but gently. Her handwriting varied with mood, sometimes narrow and careful, sometimes loose, searching. In the margins, she had drawn small arrows, connecting thoughts that did not yet know each other. That instinct, the urge to map connections, felt familiar. One entry stopped me again. It was short, observational. People reveal themselves when they think no one is listening. No date, no emphasis, just a statement placed quietly among others. I closed the notebook after that. Nothing more needed extraction. The official narrative settled quickly. Kansas, 1990. A case reopened. An investigation refined. An arrest that surprised some and confirmed others. The language used was efficient, chosen to reassure. Words like solved, concluded, complete. None of them applied fully. They never do. I was asked once how it felt to return to an old mistake and correct it. The question assumed symmetry, as if time could be folded neatly, error replaced with accuracy. I answered honestly. It felt late, necessary but late. Accuracy does not erase its own delay. The house was sold in early spring, renovated, painted, the rooms redefined. New light fixtures replaced the old, changing how shadows behaved. I did not attend the closing. Places move on without witnesses. That is their advantage over people. I drove past the riverbank where Eliza had stood in the photograph. Water moved slowly, patient, repeating itself without record. The bank showed signs of careful maintenance now. Benches installed. A path cleared. Progress framed as improvement. I parked briefly and walked to the edge, listening. Sounds softened there just as she had noted. Some observations persist because they are accurate, not because they are poetic. In the months that followed, I noticed changes in my work habits. I paused longer before closing interviews. I reviewed marginal notes instead of summaries. I trusted small inconsistencies more than clean narratives. These were not lessons learned, but reinforced. The case had reminded me, not taught me. Eliza Rowan remained 23 in every record. Her future, unwritten, stayed that way. Justice had moved mechanically, its gears turning as designed. Accountability had been assigned. Procedures satisfied. None of that restored what had been interrupted. That was never the function. I received a letter from her mother near the end of the year. It was brief, thankful, restrained. She mentioned the notebooks, how she had reread them, how certain passages felt newly clear. She did not ask questions. She did not offer closure. She acknowledged effort. That mattered more. Winter returned, bringing with it the same light that had once illuminated the forgotten room. I thought of that first morning back, dust in the air, the feeling that the space was waiting. Evidence does not forgive. It waits to be understood properly. On my desk, a new file rested, edges sharp, possibilities intact. I opened it carefully, aware of the weight that even beginnings carry. Experience does not make the work lighter. It makes it more exact. Sometimes, late in the day, I catch myself listening for sounds that are not there. The soft shift of paper, a pause before an answer. These are not habits easily shed. They are the residue of attention. The case remains resolved in every official sense. It will be cited, referenced, archived. It will serve as precedent, as reassurance, as proof that patience paired with logic produces results. All of that is true. Still, something human lingers beyond the file, beyond the shelf. It exists in the recognition that timing shapes meaning. That details ignored once can return with weight. That responsibility does not expire simply because time has passed. I shut down the lights and left the office, the hallway quiet, familiar. Outside, the night air was neutral, unremarkable. I walked to my car and paused just briefly before unlocking it. Justice had completed its task. Memory had not. The final record required no signature from me, only acknowledgement that the sequence had reached its designated end. I stood at the copier, watching the last page slide free, warm to the touch, as if movement itself left residue. Machines accept conclusions easily. They do not hesitate. They do not remember where they began. I carried the pages back to my desk and stacked them carefully, aligning corners, correcting minor shifts. Precision calms uncertainty. It gives the impression of control. Outside the window, the afternoon light flattened the street into neutral tones, neither inviting nor dismissive. The town continued its quiet routines, unaware of the small internal adjustments happening elsewhere. In training, we were taught that closure is a service, not a feeling. It exists for institutions, families, records. It creates an endpoint that allows forward motion. What it does not do is settle the human residue left behind when a life diverges from expectation. That residue lingers, thin but persistent, like dust that returns no matter how often a surface is cleaned. Eliza Rowan's name would no longer appear in active systems. It would migrate to reference databases, accessible but dormant. The date attached to it would remain unchanged, a fixed coordinate in time. Her notebooks, now back with her family, would age naturally, pages softening with each careful reading. Words endure differently when they are allowed to rest. I thought again about the moment that redirected the investigation, the small detail that had waited patiently for reconsideration. It had not demanded attention. It had simply remained accurate. That quality, accuracy without urgency, is often overlooked. We are drawn to urgency. We respond to noise. Quiet truths require deliberate listening. In the weeks after the case concluded, requests came in for commentary, analysis, reflection. I declined most of them. Public explanation tends to simplify. It reduces complexity into something portable, something that can be consumed and set aside. This case resisted that treatment. It deserved restraint. When I did speak, I focused on process, not outcome, on patience rather than discovery. I emphasized the importance of revisiting assumptions, of allowing evidence to mature. These points were received politely, noted, then absorbed into standard guidance. That is how institutions learn incrementally, without ceremony. At home, evenings became quieter. I found myself reviewing old notes, not for correction but for understanding. Patterns emerged across cases, subtle similarities in how people left traces of themselves without realizing it. A hesitation here, an extra line there. These were not confessions. They were signatures of presence. I returned once more to the riverbank as winter approached. The water moved slower now, its surface dulled by cold air. I stood where the photograph had been taken, aligning my view with the background I knew so well. The landscape offered no commentary. It did not commemorate. It simply existed, continuing its own sequence independent of human meaning. Eliza had understood that quality of places. She had noted how certain locations softened sound, altered perception. She had paid attention to how environments shape behavior. That awareness, recorded casually, had outlived her. It now lived on in the margins of her notebooks, in the quiet appreciation of those who read them closely. Justice had been applied with care, measured and deliberate. It had followed established pathways, producing outcomes that could be verified and archived. It had done its job. Yet something remained outside its reach. A human remainder, undefined, resistant to categorization. That remainder surfaced unexpectedly, often in moments of stillness, while waiting for traffic lights, while listening to the faint hum of office equipment, while standing alone in rooms after others had left. These moments carried no drama. They simply asked to be acknowledged. I learned to accept them without analysis. Not every response requires resolution. Some are simply markers, reminders that attention has consequences, that seeing something clearly creates responsibility, even when action has already been taken. The case would eventually be used as an example of persistence, of the value of returning to unresolved questions. That was appropriate. Still, I hoped it would also quietly reinforce another lesson, one less easily summarized. That time does not correct errors on its own. It only preserves them until someone chooses to look again. On my desk, a new case file waited, unopened. Its weight was familiar, its potential unknown. I placed my hand on it briefly, feeling the texture of the cover, the promise of information contained within. Beginning requires a different kind of discipline than ending. Both demand attention. As I prepared to leave for the evening, I shut down the lights one by one, allowing the office to return to its neutral state. Shadows settled where they belonged. The space released the day without protest. Outside, the air was cold and clear, uncomplicated. I walked to my car and paused, listening to the quiet around me. No revelations arrived. No conclusions formed. Only the steady awareness that some truths remain active long after systems declare completion. Justice had reached its limit. Memory had not.